Get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to those of you that are on the West Coast. Thank you for joining us today in this session of I2 Online, where we will be discussing supporting data-driven discovery on campus. I'm Mike Erickson. I'm the Associate Vice President of Community Engagement at Internet2, and I'm excited to welcome you today and host this session. And even more excited to hear from the speakers that we have with us today about CaRC and the work that it does for the community and as a part of the community, and that same community of which all of you are a part. So a few logistics, or our agenda for the day is, of course, we wanted to welcome all of you. Then we want to hear from all of our panelists around the Campus Research Computing Consortium, or CaRC. About what it does and how it functions and the good that it does. And then we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion around anything that you would like to know more about or that our panelists would like to share. So a few logistics. As a part of all of our I2 Online sessions, at least at the beginning, we mute your microphone and turn off your video through the panelists part of the presentation. If you'd like to join the conversation, please use the raise hand functionality and we'll allow you then to ask your question live, or if you would like to submit your questions through the Q&A functionality that exists, and we'll answer them either as we go or perhaps at the end through the more interactive discussion Q&A portion. We are recording the event today, and we'll make it available like we do all of our I2 Online sessions, and at the URL there on your screen. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists that we have here with us today. These leaders of the Campus Research Computing Consortium and the research computing community. We have with us Dr. Thomas Cheatham III. He's the Director of Research Computing and the Center for High Performance Computing at the University of Utah. We have Ruth Marenshaw, Chief Technology Officer of Research Computing from Stanford University. Lauren Michael, who's the lead research computing facilitator at the Center for High Throughput Computing, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and for the Open Science Grid. Claire Mizumoto, Director of Research IT Services at the University of California, San Diego. We have Mr. Patrick Schmitz. He's the founder and principal consultant of Semper Cogito Consulting. Dr. Scott Yokel is with us, University Research Computing Officer from Harvard University. And last, but certainly not least, my colleague, Dr. Dana Brunson, who is our Executive Director of Research Engagement here at Internet2. So welcome to all of you, and we look forward to your comments. And at this point, let's get started. I'll turn it over to Tom. Please go ahead.
To move forward, Patrick, next one's good. Okay, so we're today talking about the activities of the Campus Research Computing Consortium. The name doesn't quite give away all the activities that we do, but what we're trying to be is a group of people that are advocating for and advancing campus research computing and data and associated professions on our campuses, including workforce and career development, visibility, and enhancing the ability of the people who support research computing to deliver services and resources. I'm reading that because some people may not see the slide online. Now, research computing and data is a very specific term that we've developed because sometimes people call this cyber infrastructure, sometimes they call this research IT. It's definitely distinct from enterprise IT. The origins of where research computing support comes from is in high performance computing centers back 20 years ago, which was used by a subset of disciplines in our colleges, like chemistry and physics, but it's morphed into broad support for computing across all disciplines, beyond the desktop, and not just high performance computing. It's into virtual machines, it's into cloud, it's into AI, machine learning, advanced networking, data movement, and management. And so the research computing and data is a short-term that's encompassing all these aspects of networking software, everything that serves as the interface between the infrastructure, services, and people for computing technology that serves research and researchers. And the activities of this group are kind of broken out into kind of three areas. There's the people network, which you'll hear about more later, which is everyone who's involved. And we have a concept of facings, which are subsets of people that maybe interact with researchers or interact with systems stuff. And these roles are not mutually exclusive. You'll hear more about this in a slide later on. We have working and interest groups. The difference is the working group has a timeline, a charter, and a product that's going to emerge, where an interest group is really just an interest group. And we'll hear more about these. And next, we'll hear about some of the operations groups, which keep us operating. You can see the websites listed, CaRC with 2 C's at the end.org. And we're always welcoming new people to get involved. It's really, I'm nominally the chair of CaRC, but really our governance is by rough consensus among chairs of working groups and interest groups. And it's really kind of a great group of people that have been doing what you'll hear about more today as we move forward in the talk. So I'll turn it over to, I think, Lauren's next on the logistics.
Yeah, so as Tom mentioned, CaRC supports a number of working groups and interest groups. And one of our operational groups that provides sort of administrative and generalizable support across CaRC activities is the logistics group, which maintains infrastructure in support of the other activities, including the people network. So we coordinate regular get-togethers of the leadership team that Tom referenced in our group chairs and coordinators, including in-person meetings and virtual workshops where we've invited advisory input from people who are not necessarily formally involved in a CaRC activity. And then we also provide quite a bit of infrastructure for groups to organize themselves. These include our website, where working groups and interest groups can advertise what they do, who's leading, how to get involved. We have templates and best practices for operating working groups, including template charters, meeting docs, and best practices for conducting meetings that induce sort of shared ownership and engagement in working groups. And then also email lists, calendaring, and docs through Google that all of our working groups can leverage. And if you are interested in starting a new working or interest group, we've got a page that talks about exactly how to do that, listing our existing groups, and the logistics team would be there to support you. With that, I'll hand it off to the next person.
Great. As with logistics that Lauren just described, the engagement operations group, unlike working and interest groups, is a standing committee without an end date or a single product objective, as Tom mentioned. This group focuses on the people of CaRC and how to help them to engage with the CaRC community and participate in CaRC activities. Assisting RCD professionals to find CaRC resources means helping the people network tracks, which you'll hear more about, the working groups and the organization as a whole to identify and provide for RCD professionals who might be interested in CaRC activities, whether so they can listen in or present at track calls or become more active in interest or working groups. This includes improving and expanding our website content and resources available in our Google Docs and Teams areas. In 2021, the People Network mailing list has grown to include over 1,000 email addresses, but we recognize that this still doesn't include many RCD professionals. So we also want to get the word out about CaRC to those who might not obviously look to CaRC, like, for example, data librarians, networking folks who handle the research network on campuses, research software engineers, or anyone else who supports research and researchers. The engagement group is helping with consistent messaging on the website so that RCD professionals can use the content to do their jobs better and to help institutions. We also want to recognize efforts by active CaRC members so that if they have to, they can justify the time spent with this community. We appreciate that NSF is also lifting up CaRC efforts in support of RCD professionals. We couldn't do any of these activities without the many volunteer hours contributed. So look forward to seeing our what we're calling our wall of thanks, where we recognize all of those who are putting forth effort to make CaRC an even better community. And as a last note, the obligatory plug from engagement. Our website is, like Tom said, carc.org, and we have an easy email for those who want to be part of any CaRC activities or want to offer more ideas for improvement. It's getinvolved@carc.org. I think now to Dana to talk about the People Network.
Thanks, Claire. So I'm Dana, and I am co-chair of the People Network, at least for a little while longer. So the People Network is a community of practice. It takes the form of a year-round virtual conference. So that's why we have these tracks that have an email list. They each have a monthly call, and the calls are then posted on YouTube. We began this around 2018, and Lauren and Bob are also co-chairs, and thankfully to them, I'll soon be handing off my baton to each of those. The tracks themselves are around what we call the facings, and you can see here on the slide the various ones that we have. And this started, back in a workshop in 2017 when we were with some social scientists trying to figure out what is this research, computing, and data or cyber infrastructure profession. And this has turned out to be a good framing for us to have at least a shared understanding of the roles people take. So these are, they're not mutually exclusive, because at some campuses, you might have one person that does all of these things, and at really large centers, you might have a group that's involved in each one of them. So they're meant to be very inclusive, and these evolve as time goes by. And as community members want to have a new track, then they can come with the People Network and possibly create a new one. You'll notice down in the software facing, we don't have a software facing track, but there is the US Research Software Engineering Association that has a robust community providing support for that aspect of the community. So for this one, I think the take home message, this is like the most outward facing, kind of the heart and soul of CaRC. It's all of the people that we're aiming to serve in all of these areas. And the cost to join is filling out a form on the website. So let's go to the next slide. And here's the people that make it happen. So for each track, there's 2 coordinators, and the systems and researcher facing have steering committees. My deepest gratitude to all of these folks. They are all leaders in our community, and I think they benefit too by one, having fun and making friends, but really building their professional network. So this is an often overlooked aspect of professional development, to have these opportunities to be national leaders in our community. And then the next slide, we have some fun facts. So as Claire mentioned, that we have over 1,000 members in the People Network list. And then we've been tracking, what are the most popular calls and how many show up. So we had 174. That was our most populated call in February. In fact, today we had a great plenary session on security around research, and we had, I think, 115 folks there, which I think is pretty good for the middle of August. We've had 52,000 YouTube impressions. And so I guess what I want to say is, like, most of our calls right now, at least get into triple digits. I think it's having a big impact on the community. The notes are coming out of these and being used by folks, and they're being able to share things that and learn things that they wouldn't otherwise learn by just staying with their head down to the grindstone, so to speak. So on the next slide, we have a little nice graph of the growth. So that we started this in around 2018, and you can see as the track started, how much they've grown over time. And so these are the people, and this is why we do it all. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Tom.
Tom, get on mute.
So when CaRC first started out, we were somewhat viewed as a threat in the community to trying to take over various aspects, but it's evolved into a group that we're now seeing as a group that's a recognized leader, boundary spanner within and across the community. We aim for transparency, open collaboration, shared credit, and shared attribution for things that are done. So some of the working group products you'll see are not just CaRC, they're involving other groups like EduCause or Internet2. We've delivered some valuable products, and you'll hear about some of these today. And we're working to do more. Finally, we're really happy for NSF funding that's come in the form of an NSF Cyber Infrastructure Center of Excellence pilot 2-year award for the RCD Nexus. And we'll hear about some of the activities that are moving forward with that. The RCD Nexus is kind of a partner with CaRC or part of CaRC. So CaRC has activities that are outside the Nexus and then partner within the funded efforts. And we expect these efforts to expand as we move forward. And again, we encourage anyone who's interested to get involved and to help out in little ways or big ways. And with that, I guess we will move to the next capabilities model.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm Patrick Schmitz again, and I want to tell you about one of the things that I care a lot about among the activities at CaRC. I'm going to go through a lot of content quickly, but you can always go back to the slides afterwards if I talk too fast. I want to first mention, again, speaking of Tom about the attribution. This is a really important project that was seeded out of Internet2, who originally came up with these ideas and got the discussions going. CaRC has facilitated the working group that developed the tools and supports the work. And EduCause has been an important partner through their research, computing, and data community group, and in particular the team that supports the core data survey, who we've collaborated with in talking about this kind of data gathering. So for those of you who are not already familiar with the capabilities model, many of us have at some point asked, how can we get a comprehensive view of our support? And how do we represent the state of our research, computing, and data services to leadership and key stakeholders? And then obviously, are we missing something? What else should we be paying attention to that we might not have thought of? And as we think about strategic planning, funding, and hiring, how can we identify areas for improvement and growth? So the model allows institutions to assess their support for computationally and data-intensive research. The structured model facilitates discussion among different groups, roles, and service providers. It helps you identify gaps, and these gaps may already be on your radar, or they may be in areas you weren't thinking about. The model itself was developed by a diverse group of institutions with a range of support models, and the assessment tool is designed for use by a broad range of institutions. The structured model shared across the community facilitates gathering a valuable data set for understanding broader trends, as well as patterns among subgroups, for example, emerging centers versus existing R1s and EPSCoR eligible institutions. So at this point, we have over 179, almost 180 institutions that have downloaded this. They represent 45 US states, the District of Columbia, a couple of US territories, 4 of the Canadian provinces, UK, New Zealand. It's just growing all over the place. It's a pretty good mix of Carnegie classifications, including a balance of public and private institutions, and you'll see some of the EPSCoR and non-EPSCoR states. We're making some progress with some of the smaller and minority institutions, but we continue to focus outreach efforts there. Of those who downloaded it, a good mix of them is really interested in strategic planning, using it for strategic planning, as well as benchmarking their current service offerings to understand where they stand with respect to the community and some of their peers. But a fair number of institutions also just want to understand common practices and understand what is the union of all things that they might consider for research, computing, and data support. We published the first community data set this past January, which also provided the basis for the individualized benchmarking reports. This graphic here is a scatter graph of one of the data visualizations from that 2020 report. And it just, without going into it, it's showing a huge variance in capabilities coverage across the community. People are literally all over the map. There's been a fair amount of interest in the report, as well as a PERC 21 paper that summarized our findings. For those of you who aren't familiar, PERC is a sort of the conference of biggest focus for our community. This past winter, we released an update to the assessment tool that incorporated feedback from the community And we're continuing our activity to support institutions who are using the capabilities model to assess their campus RCD programs. A few weeks ago, we had a full house at our PERC 21 workshop in which we were discussing approaches and good practices for strategic planning, leveraging assessment data from the capabilities model. Workshop participants also identified key resources that would support strategic planning for research computing and data. And the working group is going to take those and work to gather and share these resources for the community broadly, especially helping institutions that don't have a long tradition or a lot of resources for strategic planning. Also at PERC, there was a Birds of a Feather session hosted by members of a new CARC working group addressing EPSCoR and other under-resourced institutions. This Birds of a Feather session led to a couple of new institutions getting involved in the work, which was great. We're currently supporting institutions to complete and contribute their assessment data to the 2021 community data set leading up to a September 30th deadline. We're hosting office hours and providing individualized consulting, again, especially to under-resourced institutions. And thanks to our new NSF funding, we're going to be able to re-implement the existing assessment tool. We had a prototype implementation, but we're going to re-implement it on a new and more robust survey platform, which will be much nicer for institutions working on assessments as well as for the working group as we aggregate the data. We're also going to replace the static reports we generated for the first version with a data exploration portal that allows folks to interactively explore the community data set with their institutional benchmarking reports. Finally, we're pleased to be able to work more closely with institutions to help them understand the model, complete their assessments, and leverage the results as part of their strategic planning process. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Scott to talk about the work of the professionalization working group.
Thanks, Patrick. So as Dana had mentioned, back in 2016, 2017 timeframe, there was around 30 directors or so of research computing and a handful of organizational sociologists that got together on an NSF funded like RCN award to like wrestle with the term, or to wrestle with what is the CI profession? Who are these people? What do they do? Is this its own thing, or is it just a subset of IT? And anyways, since then, it has spurred a considerable amount of interest around professionalization, and a number of activities have happened. And so in CARC, starting in 2018, shortly after the consortium was formed, we had a working group that created, we came together as a workshop in 2018 and created this job elements and career guide, where we really solidified what are the roles and responsibilities of the facings. And that was a really important kind of stake in the sand. And I think that's where we kind of just started. And one of the feedback that we got from presenting that was that we could really use something more tangible to work with HR, like a template of jobs. And so then in 2019, we came back and created a job family matrix. And that's been downloaded to this point about 140 times. There's about 30% of people who've downloaded that are looking to implement it. So you're seeing this starting to become a framework where each one of the facings, as we were calling it, are actually job series. And then after we presented that throughout the year, people started to talk more about like what other information would be useful for hiring managers and things like that. And so in 2020, I'm getting my years confused now within the pandemic. So last summer, there was a NSF funded workshop that was hosted by Purdue around the CI workforce. And a small subgroup of that of us kicked out and then created a working group through 2020. And so we'll talk about that today in more detail. And then 2021, Patrick helped spur the activity around career arcs, which we'll finish talking about. So next. So within the survey working group, our objectives were to not only just create a survey tool, right, but also to look at what were other prior surveys, see where they look successful, what's the kind of missing data from those. And largely those were very enterprise IT centric type surveys that we could find, or they'd be very discipline specific. We didn't have anything to look at that was remotely close to what we were trying to go after. And in the January through February timeframe, we started to determine what was going to provide the most value for the individuals and the institutions as a whole. And so with that, we created a survey, we beta tested it, and then we launched it, and had to go, of course, through an IRB process as we're asking very specific information about the individual and their demographics, about their pay, about their salary. We're also asking questions related to their position and what does the position do, things like that. And we also ask about questions about their aspects and their feelings about the profession as a whole. So next. So just a quick snapshot, always trying to show who's involved in this activity. And so Christina from Northwestern is actually the lead PI on this study. She's the one who went through all the rigor to go through the IRB. But you can see we have a good mixture of public and private schools from East Coast and West Coast. Some of these people are directors, some are managers, some are part of the kind of IT HR kind of support structure or finance within research computing. So a good mixture. And the goals of the workforce survey itself was really to describe the workforce. We don't have really any understanding of that. And when you work with HR, you know, when you're a hiring manager, like they have no data on this, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to be able to compare this workforce to maybe like higher ed academic IT workforce or other types of make other types of comparisons. How are we doing with demographics and education and related to the positions and what people do? And then we want to make sure that we understand what are people's job titles and what do they actually do for work? How are they aligned or misaligned? As I've learned a lot in the years that I've been as a manager in hiring, that means a lot when it comes to HR. And so we have to really hone in on how to tweak that and do the right thing for the individuals. And then basically we don't have any data, like I said, so we're going to generate a lot of data around salary, job titles, job families, and be able to try to map them back to the HR framework that we talked about and did the work on before. So in this slide, you can help us and then we can help you. So quickly, you can go ahead and click. So how will this benefit you as an individual? The study, like I said, is going to be the first large data set of this type. So you can help us because we need your data, but we can help you because we're going to provide a portal of this data back to you. But we can't do that if we don't have enough. We don't have enough respondents. We can't get into some of the demographics and things like that and be able to make good comparisons between like institutions. Who should take this survey? Everyone. Everyone who's ever been a part of research computing and data support, whether they're in a central group, individual lab, if they're in a company now and they used to do this, everybody that you know should do that. And then lastly, how can you help us? First, you can take the survey yourself, right? There's a portion of it for almost everyone. And you also please spread the word. Take this information, distribute it across your campus. If it comes from somebody that they know, like yourselves that are attending this call, they will most likely take it. If it comes from somebody they've never heard of, it's less likely. So please help us. And the next few slides are for Patrick to talk about career arcs.
Thanks, Scott. So closely related to all the things that Scott was just describing, in some of those workshops, we heard from people across the community, there was a number of issues with trying to build this workforce. So one of the biggest things is that individuals just don't understand research computing and data as a career. So there hasn't been any formal career path structure. And there's little awareness of what they can do if they get into one of these roles and moving through that and actually building a career out of it. Research computing and data groups often struggle to recruit and retain staff. They don't know where to look for the right kinds of people. They don't always know how to train them, how to build those programs that develop folks. And they don't really know how to develop and promote them within the roles. They get somebody who's really great in something, but they don't know, okay, well, how do they describe a path beyond them? And the Career Arcs resource is really designed to help address these challenges. So the main elements that we have planned for this are to gather narratives of how and why, frankly, existing RCD staff got into these roles. This just helps people to see what it would look like if they wanted to get into it, and once they're there, how should they think about that? Examples of effective recruitment programs. There's individuals across the country or campus institutions that have built some really great programs and figured out where to find some people and how to recruit them. We want to learn from them and share those good practices. And then understanding what next steps are for existing RCD staff. So not just how do you get into these roles, but where can you go next? Because not everybody wants to become a manager. For some of them, it may be deep technical expertise or a domain expertise. and others may really want to pursue leadership. So we want to identify the training requirements and sources and providers of training to allow people to advance in these different methods, along these different paths. So, and then lastly, we recognize that some people will go into industry and some people may return from industry. We hired a lot of people when I was at Berkeley who wanted to come back and work at the university because they thought it was more satisfying. So to date, the working group has been collecting and reviewing these example narratives and understanding some of the key points, the decision points and factors, catalysts for coming into these things. And so we're currently developing a survey for a larger scale, shallower data approach to keep these narrative arcs. And then also having an interview script for a smaller set of deeper narratives that will build stories that people can then find and relate to. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of my partners around staff and student professional development.
Thanks, Patrick. Hi again, everyone. So looking forward to the NSF CI Center of Excellence pilot, specifically the RCD Nexus. We want to build on the good work already happening, the activities you're hearing about, address the current need, and look to the future. To do this, we want to provide a resource and career center where our focus can be categorized in 3 areas: supporting RCD professionals, providing training and development opportunities, building on the community started and going strong in CaRC and other places, helping RCD practitioners to grow and do their jobs better. And we'd like to help those who are looking to move into an RCD profession, that this might be a resource for them as well. Next slide, please. Thanks. In the second area, we want to address students. Those who are working with us already in research, computing, and data in student roles, and those who want to develop into RCD professionals. Perhaps they don't want to be in an academic career track, a faculty career track. And again, building on the good work going on now to provide examples and resources to build your own student programs. Next slide. In the third area, we want to look at RCD from the institution's perspective. What resources we can provide to the institution to support their research, computing, and data programs and their professionals, and pointers and support to products like the RCD capabilities model for strategic planning and professionalization efforts, career arcs for program growth and improvement. So that's one piece of RCD Nexus. Now back to Dana to talk about the greater community.
Thanks, Claire. So this is again part of the RCD Nexus grant, the CICOE pilot, where we want to talk about what we've done before that we're going to leverage and learn from to understand what we need to do next. And one of those is the research, computing, and data ecosystem. And on this slide, you'll see the alphabet soup, which is just a small slice of many of the available organizations and projects in this country that enable research. And it's complex, it's constantly evolving. So, you know, if you're a current member of the community or even harder, a new member of the community, this is hard to get your head around, right? If you're trying to enable a researcher and work in that art of the possible of the things that they might be able to do if they had access to so many possibilities, it's difficult. And, you know, things like the People Network help that because you learn a lot as you go. But especially if you're starting out, it's really hard to get started. And so one of the things that we also, that another piece of this is just even between these groups and organizations, we need to be able to do these warm handoffs. Like if you're working with a researcher and you need the services of, say, Epic, then you want to know Jen Shop and her team and know that if you direct your researcher to work with them, that they're going to be in good hands. And the same with all of these other instances. So we want to raise awareness amongst these organizations and just try to make some sort of sense of it. So not only to know what they are, but also to be able to investigate what gaps are left that we need to fill. And so on the next slide, you can see some of the timeline of what we've done so far. So early on in the fall of 2018, going into April of 2019, we decided to have an ecosystem workshop wherein we invited all those groups you saw on the previous page to get together and talk about what would be the greatest benefit if we were all to, build some sort of community of communities and connect with each other, recognizing, everybody's their unique identity along with our shared identity in all of these. And out of that working group, one subgroup came out and began working on just basically an inventory, a clearinghouse of what the organizations are, what their missions are, who they serve, things like that. We presented at Kirk and then wrote a paper for PERC 20. And then again, it came up in the workshop Scott mentioned earlier, the NSF CI workforce workshop that we had last fall, where one of the recommendations was to have an organization of communities to help bring these groups together, work together, and have a shared voice, shared identity, advocacy, all those kinds of things you can do if you're closer to a profession, which ties into the professionalization working group. And so with the new COE pilot award, we're going to be able to have a little bit of funding now to dive into this a little deeper and bring those groups together and start planning more of what a full COE might be. So on the next slide, so here's some of the things that just to wrap this up, foster and nurture those connections among those communities, curate pathways for the new people wanting to come into the community, the shared voice, the advocacy, and of course to increase our diversity, equity, and inclusion. And with that, I think I hand it to Tom next.
Yes, so beyond the RCD Nexus, CARC has a number of other activities that are emerging and some are already underway. One in particular that's important is this Decadal Survey, which I'll let Ruth talk about.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit more with you about some of CARC's additional future forward activities. As you've heard throughout the last 40-ish minutes, and yourselves, because you are RCD professionals, each in our own way, this is a very diffuse and a very diverse community. And we've heard about a number of the products and activities that CARC has undertaken to help professionalize the research computing and data, RCD/CI, cyber infrastructure. I know RCD is the term we're all using, but some of you may have come to this presentation really saying, what's RCD? I'm a CI professional, cyber infrastructure. I've known that word for a decade. But a lot of folks, when they hear CI, they think cyber infrastructure. That must be cybersecurity. Okay, no, it's not. And Tom opened today's discussion talking about the extent to which research computing and data-focused activities permeate our campuses. Almost every discipline, almost every department with whom campus IT professionals work today requires some aspect of computing and data technology to help their research and scholarship. And what we don't have in the research computing and data community today, and we have never had in this community, which is not a new community, as you've heard. We've had these various groups for years and years and years. We don't have a plan as a community on what needs to be done and what we believe should be done from an infrastructure, cyber infrastructure, research computing, investment and priority perspective to support these various scientific and scholarly disciplines that depend upon us. If you come from a scientific community, you may be aware of, and you may have helped shape your own science community's decadal survey. Decadal surveys are not uncommon in the science fields. There have been decadal surveys for the astronomy community, for the geosciences community, for the space observations of Earth community, the oceans communities. And those articulate, in every case, scientific challenges and the big priorities for the coming decade. But as we've read through all of those, they also point out a number of areas in which there are challenges that they need us to help address. So the Decadal Survey Interest Group, soon to be a working group, is focused on developing, with lots of community input, as well as domain scientist input, a plan for the next 10 years to lay out as a community our collective priorities and our recommendations for investments by stakeholders, whether campus stakeholders or national, to help achieve those in the interest of scientific discovery and advancing research broadly. So we want to speak as a voice, and we have been meeting on this effort for a little over a year now. We are making plans for our next steps to include a basic survey and a series of focus groups and discussions to help then shape what we do on a broader scale to really refine, to identify better, refine, and help set those priorities going forward. So we'd love to have you involved. And with that, I will turn it back to Tom.
We have a lot of NSF support that's received over the years, and as we've evolved our understanding of what the research computing and data profession is. At first, we thought it was the people who interact with researchers. It evolved into the multiple facings. So that the first part was through the ACI REF grant, which is listed there. You can see the RCN for the CARC consortium that was funded. It's going to be ending this year. The new CI/COE demo pilot and a new grant for building cyber infrastructure and EPSCoR jurisdictions. And I think with that, we move into the question phase.
Yeah, well, thank you all. Thanks to all 7 of you for that amazing information. Just a ton of information there about CARC. So yeah, at this point, let's open it up to the attendees here, those that came to join and learn about CARC, and see what questions they have. If you have any, you can either put them in the chat, raise hand, use the Q&A functionality. Are there any questions out there? Well, I know that there was a lot of information provided about CARC and all of the work that it does, and clearly does a tremendous amount and provides a tremendous number of resources for the community. So if someone came today, and look, anybody here, one of our panelists could respond, but if someone came as a participant today to hear about how they could support data-driven discovery on campus, and they now encounter CARC and the number of resources that you've identified, and there's the people network, and there's the working groups, and there's the capabilities model, and there's a data set you published, and the professional is, how do they start? How would you suggest somebody who's come here, either as a researcher or someone that supports researchers, how do they start leveraging all these research? Where do you begin with all those resources? So Lauren, you unmuted. Would you like to go? Or?
Sure. And others may have other ideas that will be great. But I would say the easiest way would be to get involved with the people network. And for those who are interested in sort of newly establishing or looking into supporting research, computing, and data in a more formalized way on their campus, there's the Emerging Centers track in the People Network, which is specifically for organizations that may be emerging or investigating the implementation of research, computing, and data services on a campus.
I'd add that the CARC.org website has a lot of information on the products. It's not perfect, but we're trying to make it better and prettier and nicer. But a lot of information is there. And as you understand what CaRC's doing. If you have information about gaps, things that we aren't doing that you think the community needs to do, we'd love to hear about it as well.
I think there's kind of two phases. There's the like help the staff that you have now, and I think the people network is great for that. And some of the other activities we're doing, you know, like the career arcs and the surveys and stuff like that, are in the HR frameworks, are to help the future of the profession and the staff, right? That's kind of like a longer term commitment to helping staff. But the immediate thing, they can plug it right into the people network. So
Very good. Thank you. So we do have a question, perhaps a question for Ruth. How do you see the engagement and the participation of the major research funding agencies in the decadal blueprinting? NIH, NSF, NASA.
Yeah, that's a great question. We will have conversations with individuals at the primary agencies. And in addition, we have looked and we will continue to look at their published documents that deal with research computing and data focused areas, in some cases plans. For example, the NSF has a series of blueprints that have come out over the last couple of years that do deal with, in a very detailed way, sort of their vision and their plan for prioritization and investment of their programmatic dollars and new programs over the coming years. So we want to understand better, I think, across all of the agencies, whether they're thinking about this, how they're thinking about this, and then to as great an extent as we can to validate that with the community and see where there are gaps and decide, broadly, are we all actually in consensus or not? I think our effort is an opportunity to span the various areas, whereas a number of the agencies, even though if you look at any single agency, its breadth may seem, wow, that's really varied. They're actually focused on and have slightly different missions. So we want to connect those. And I appreciate the question. And if you have recommendations or suggestions on ways we could be more inclusive, that would be super helpful, and we would welcome those.
Yeah, I'll add that we want to be informed by the agencies, but not driven by the agency's agenda. And we also want to go from high end down to the lagging tail of research computing and data across all institutions, not just R1s, but from emerging to advanced.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. The new working group that is supporting EPSCoR state institutions who are gathering information about their shared problems and gaps. Those having the engagement of that broad range of schools, including engagement with another group that Internet 2 facilitates, the minority serving consortium, is part of our outreach efforts to bring in that broader audience that Tom was talking about and inform the Decadal Survey that Ruth has been describing.
Please go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I can't remember, I'm pretty sure Henry Neiman has this stat, but something like 80% of all of the workforce that's trained within the academic institution space does not happen in R1s. So computing and data discovery in the workforce at large, right, is a really important thing for our for students, right? So we need to be able to come up with a way to support them regardless of what institution they're in. And I think I think the survey can start to speak to that as well.
And then I agree, Scott. I was impressed with the breadth of the responses, of the breadth of the institutions that have pulled down some of the resources that were shown by one of the graphics that Patrick had mentioned, that it is getting a lot of use across not just the R1s, but the other institutions. And I agree with Scotty, if spanning the agencies and trying to discern some unifying language and approach would be awesome. That would be tremendous. So I'm glad that we're looking at that. So this is great for the RCD community. This is great for those that have chosen perhaps to pursue the research computing data professional's career, whether they knew that was what they called themselves or not until CaRC started doing this. But that only works to a point, and then at some point, the executive level of organizations, the executive level of leadership, the HR departments, they have to understand this work. How would all of you say that you're doing your outreach to those types of units, organizations, CIOs, vice presidents of research? What does your outreach to them look like so that you can change it from the outside in as well?
I'd say it's challenging. We haven't done a great job with that yet. We're just reaching into the community we know, which are most of the people working at research computing shops at various universities. We have not really tapped into the domain scientist who's working in a lab as a technical person, writing code and doing advanced computational work. We're starting to try to reach to them. I put the survey out to those type of people at my university yesterday, as a matter of fact. This meeting is an attempt to reach out to CIOs and also working with EDUCAUSE and others. And once we develop the stakeholder and value proposition or stakeholder facing track with EDUCAUSE and CASC, that will also be a venue to reach higher up. But this is where our problem is as a community, is that our universities don't really know we're that important to supporting the research and the researchers. You know, Central IT can get a new ERP system or suddenly move Microsoft to the cloud at ease, whereas us to get sustainable funding to support the massive growth we're seeing across campuses is very difficult. But I'll let others speak.
On the HR part, one of the threads of activity for the RCD Nexus, the NSF COE grant, is to create kind of a small group of us that have done the work on our local campus and engaged a lot with HR and learned a lot in that process around creating a job family for research computing and data, and then creating a cohort of that can then tap into consult at other institutions, because then we can come in as a non-biased person. We have no stake in it, but we can at least tell you pros and cons of there's a lot of different choices people have to make. And I think that's where it's hard for HR to know where to do that. So.
Yeah, piggybacking on both of those, it's multi-pronged. It's presentations like this one to communities like this one, and also leveraging the tremendous community in the people network. I mean, I'm of course more involved with CaRC in sort of a leadership way, but I think to some extent I had to jump on the opportunity when my campus's HR invested in a completely new set of titles and compensation. And then I was able to take the HR framework and say, hey, I've got something for research computing. It turned out they had no idea what they were doing there and knew they needed help, but nowhere to turn. And so I think we have to go bottom up and top down. And I think we could work a bit more on the top down. We've got quite a tremendous community in the bottom up way.
Those are great ideas, leveraging opportunities and catalysts like you mentioned, Lauren. That sometimes those are keys to beginning to start the conversation more broadly. So very good. Any other questions from the community? Anything that resonated with you or you would like to know more about? Because we can refer you to the carc.org website, but I've looked out there and there's a lot of information. So if we can provide some insights to those that came today, point you directly to some resources like have been done, we're happy to do that. So Dana, to your diagram that you showed of the ecosystem, there's a lot of acronyms on there. There's a lot of overlap perhaps. And I think you described a bit of what CaRC is trying to do there, but the vision for CaRC beyond the Decadal Survey, how does it see itself? And how do you see, with this community's help that's here, perhaps today to learn more, where CaRC's role in a year or 2 years? How do you see the evolution of CaRC?
I think, so I see all the threads we talked about today kind of overlapping in how CaRC is seen in the future, right? I think, you know, when CaRC first began, there was a little bit of issues with, oh, they're doing all this stuff trying to take over the world or whatever, right? And so I think all of us here want to, our first mission is to deliver value to the community. And through, you know, the capabilities model, the professionalization work, including the career arcs, the people network, the Decadal Survey, right? All of those things come together to inform what we should do. So even like when we did first start, we did one of those multi-stakeholder surveys, you know, a la Joel Gershenfeld. And that got a lot of responses, and it was the community that drove us toward these working groups, right? We didn't sit in a small room and decide we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Those things said, you know, support the facilitators and professionalization and stuff. Those were the most important and challenging. And those were definitely things that, you know, us as individuals spread across all these campuses couldn't do by ourselves, right? So one of the things we always look at is what are the challenges, you know, across the board that together we can do together. And I think at this point with that larger ecosystem, right, this does go, I think a lot of it comes down to those boundary spanners, right? There was a little diagram there. It's the people who can bridge between these communities, be kind of the trusted broker between them so that we understand that we are all in this together, right? We are all in here to support research and enable its use of all this complex technology, and that we will serve the research better, serve the nation and the world better if we can all share, trust, and leverage each other and admit gaps and struggles so that we can help each other. And so I think that's the idea. And I think how that gets executed is, you know, has a lot of variables around it, because we want everyone to, we want that consensus amongst the communities. And I think that will come as these things progress.
Very good. Yeah. So everyone that attended today, I think there's your call to action by Dana, which is lend your voice to this, participate in the survey, get involved, because that's how CaRC moves forward, is with the voice from the community and the priorities from the community. So anything else anyone would like to add before we wrap up? We're at time. So
I think we listen to the voice, and then we also try to be really cognizant about taking actual action and not just lip service to stuff. We push really hard to make things happen. And that only works because the people that are involved, right? And the people change. We know people get busy with other stuff. So it's kind of a nice way to engage with your peers as well.
yeah, I'd agree. And I think, Scott, it's evidenced by the work products, the tangible things that have come out of the CaRC's work that we've heard about today. So thank you all. I know we're at time. Thanks to the 7 folks that participated, and I know we need to get on, but thank you. And we look forward to hearing more about all of the work. And thanks for everyone who joined today to learn more. I encourage you to get involved.